Hello, I'm Dr. Rao Khan, and I'll be talking about Agile project management to you all. So, despite there's been a lot of industry buzz about the need for agility in today's economy, many industries continue to use a more traditional approach to manage the very projects that enable agility at their core business. So, organizations have invested in the development and adoption of project management techniques, including PERT, PERT, and earned value management since the days of World War II. So, in the economies of that big business era, there was an emphasis that was placed on quality and doing it right. And so, what that meant is it translated into processes that were rigid in nature and hierarchical, with an emphasis on serial phases and permission gates between phases. So, but as the global economy started to evolve, new management techniques, such as concurrent engineering, entered into the marketplace. Today, doing it right is no longer good enough. Corporations have to get it done rapidly because consumers' desire for speed has really transformed that business behavior. So, if a corporation can't quickly respond to that market need, that need is going to get fulfilled somewhere else, perhaps outside of the local economy. So, project and program managers leading these critical initiatives need to understand and appreciate these business pressures and be ready to adapt those processes accordingly to be more agile. In fact, society went through a paradigm shift in the latter part of the 20th century with the emergence of the internet and its associated technology. So, as a result, we're approaching a state of a single global society or economy. With globalization, we're seeing that the boundaries that separated cultures and people and geographies are starting to become less and less because people are mixing ideas and interacting a lot more through the internet. Thomas Friedman had called it a flattened world. So, how does this shift impact our business approach and the way that we manage projects? Is that it's causing organizations and project managers to have to respond with tools and techniques like agile project management. Now, there's a lot being written these days about the need for agility in businesses, especially in information technology and in projects related to developing corporate differentiators. So it's questionable whether there really is true appreciation for what is meant by agility. I mean, to the dismay of some managers, agility doesn't mean unmanaged or undocumented. Rather, agility means the ability to quickly adjust and respond to these changing business needs. So let's take a closer look at the meaning of agility. So agility, it actually comes from the Latin root agere, which means to drive, to act. It implies a sense of ownership. And so additionally, it also means having a quick, resourceful, and adaptable character. So in terms of project management, agility has these five essential attributes that form that building blocks of the agile process. And so those five are transparency, having a customer focus, being able to adapt, a sense of ownership, which can only come if you have effective leadership, and then lastly, continuous improvement. So, how exactly is the traditional project planning different from agile planning? That's a great question, and it can be hard to understand at the beginning. So, in the past, business leaders spent an enormous amount of time just laying out the plans of executing that project, many years into the future. For a long time, that way of planning worked perfectly. However, markets became more dynamic in the last decade of the 20th century. Business requirements started to change a lot more quickly, and a new flexible way of planning became absolutely necessary. So that need became obvious and somewhat critical with the rise of the knowledge work. So while 50 years ago, people worked primarily in factories, these days people work in offices where they use their heads more than their hands. It's precise knowledge work where Agile project plan is probably the best utilized. Now, there's some key differences between Agile planning and the traditional project planning, which is also known as waterfall. The first one, Agile planning, is iterative and it adapts to change. In contrast, your waterfall or your traditional planning is more of a step by step process that focuses on doing a heavy amount of planning even before the project starts. So we can't say that one is better than the other. They have their virtues. When you're building a bridge or a building, you want to have a detailed plan and a well thought of plan. Here, welcoming requirements late in the process with an agile project plan is probably not the best choice. Of course, it can happen, but changes might be costly to implement. However, if you're in a project that is involved in knowledge work, change is welcome at any stage of that process, even at the end. So the goal is really to create the solution that satisfies customers and everything is allowed. Simply said, agile project management, you lay down the detailed plans only for short time frames and you can easily make changes as they're needed. Now, there are definitely some common characteristics between traditional projects and agile projects. In many cases, you'll end up using a combination of methods, which is referred to as agile, waterfall, hybrid method. Now, so the commonalities between a traditional project approach and an agile would be there has to be a vision for the end game. The second is there needs to be a universally understood project life cycle. Third, obviously, you need to know what the requirements are so that you will know what the objective of the entire project is. And using and sharing a managed schedule. And then fourthly, having a dedicated team that's committed to getting the job done. And the most important of all is there, and critical would be the communication with all of the stakeholders. So let's kind of break down why is it that agile project management is considered an incremental model. It's not just an incremental model, but it's also an iterative model. So, but what does increments mean in that terms? So, therefore, instead of project work being completed in this linear fashion with one delivery phase, the project work is actually divided into increments, as you can see from my slide. So, each increment is going to deliver one feature of that entire product. So, if we're talking about a car, the first increment of work is going to deliver maybe just the windows or just the steering wheel for that car. And then the next increment, we would probably take that steering wheel and we would work on putting in some connections to your Apple iPod or your Apple Music and having a volume button and so forth. We would keep adding features and then getting it approved by the customer to see that that actually matches their vision. And so with each increment, the project actually goes through a cycle of requirements gathering. Then you take those requirements, translate them into a design. And then after you've got the design planned out, then we go into actually the creation part, which is the development. And then we test it to make sure that it's functional. And so in my steering wheel example, we want to make sure the sound volume works. We want a steering wheel that you can actually turn. And then we would do a demo for the customer. So as we move through each piece of the project, we're taking the project one piece at a time and delivering each piece. So incremental development is an approach that rather than following a linear progression, you're going to go through conception, analysis, design, testing, release, even maintenance. Every sequential increment is going to respond to changes or developments that have already been made. So that means that if you've got that steering wheel, we are set, we are happy with the steering wheel. Once we know that, we can decide on how to create the dashboard. Obviously, if you're going to create the dashboard for the car, it's going to have the same color, same materials. And so based on the steering wheel choices, we would be able to match the seats and also the dashboard. So this is essentially going to be the way software development equivalent is to a factory assembly line. So while you've got incremental approaches are less flexible compared to iterative approaches, the two methods in the software development projects are used together. So what does iterative approach mean? One agile iteration is simply a short period of time during which a section of the work is developed and tested, which each iteration has a completion date by which the deliverables have to be achieved. So, really, when we're using the iterative approach, we're focusing on delivering value as fast as possible in increments rather than a fully completed product. Not so, we're only creating the steering wheel in that increment. We're not creating the entire car and then showing it to the customer. So, this approach is especially useful in the software development and product development. So, what it means that you're going to split the entire product development process into multiple explicit versions. And so it allows those software developers to be able to adjust, refine, and review so they can improve that performance incrementally. And so the design of an iterative approach is very simple and easy to implement, regardless of what the context is. So we also know that the Agile iterative model is also called PDCA. I think you'll probably read about PDCA in the future modules of this course. So P for plan, D for design, C for check, and A for adjust. So in this 4 steps, in the planning step, we're focusing on planning and discussion of those requirements. We're going to be speaking with our customer and then ironing out what the objective of the project is. And so for software developers, we're recapping finished iterations. We also discuss what are the anticipated needs moving forward. Now, when we get to the design stage, we are concerned with, taking those requirements and either creating a model or some sort of pictorial diagram so that we have an understanding of what these requirements written in words are, but now they can be translated into a prototype of some sort. And we can test the functionality of that product. And that's also part of the design stage. Now, C in the PDCA cycle is checking. And so the checking is concerned with ensuring that whatever feature we've completed actually meets those requirements. If the criteria is not met, we go back to the drawing board and to all the other phases so that we can recreate that feature. So in my steering wheel thing, maybe we created a steering wheel, but then we put pink fur on it, for example, just because we wanted to make it, very hip. But then we go to the client and the client says, no, I wanted leather, not pink fur. So then we'd have to go back, redesign that entire steering wheel, and then we would bring it back with the type of leather. And maybe then the customer says, well, this leather is kind of rough. It doesn't meet the type of quality I was looking for. I was looking for pure Italian type so that the steering wheel can go in my brand new Bugatti sports car. Woohoo! Wouldn't we all wish? And so we would then go back and we would study the different types of grades of leather. And then we would bring the swatches to the client and the client would pick the swatch. And then we would redesign this steering wheel with this high grade leather. And that would also mean we would have to redo the dashboard and the seats. So agility essentially has 3 characteristics in the project management world, which is a sense of ownership and authority in respect to the customer. The customer, it gets to dictate what they want. There's quick and easy changes for direction, and it's very resourceful and adaptable too. Now, project management, just like your traditional, is going to go through a series of phases, but they have different names. So that's envision, speculate, and then explore and adapt. So let's look at some of the highlights. If we look at the envision stage, you and your customer are sitting down and you're going to have the customer describe to you what is their vision. And then you, as the software developer, is going to try to build that. And so you'll also try to confirm who needs to be on your team. So this is where the team starts to assemble. You'll also determine the team, kind of a team charter, where you're determining what the team values are, what are the norms, how often are you going to meet, how are conflicts going to be resolved. And so it's the end game for the envision stage is to have a project charter. And that's going to, in the project charter, that's going to iron out what the scope is. For example, the scope. We're going to not only tell what the scope of the project is, but what's also outside of the scope of the project. So we will design the customer a leather steering wheel, but we're not going to have it have be bling bling with rhinestones. We're definitely not going to be involved in stitching embroidery into the thing. And that also has to be discussed with the customer. We will design you a functional thing, but it's not going to have Christmas lights on it. It's not going to glow in the dark. And that's also not a scope. We're also not going to be designing a steering wheel that has, rhinestones or any of that. It's just going to be something that is fashionable for a Bugatti. So once we have that done and we've described the scope and the objectives, now we are going to have to decide, what type of tools are we going to use for team collaboration? You could use Asana. You can also use Microsoft Word, or you can use, what is it called? You can use a dashboard. You can use Kanbans. There's all different ways of collaborating. So, and also other things that you'll discuss with your team is, what are the working hours? When can you reach me? When can you not? Are we going to be a 24-hour available team? Are we going to be geographically located across countries? And how are we going to solve problems? And what the expectations are for responding to any emails from each other as well. So it's kind of like creating the group rules. Now we'll move on to the speculate stage. Now in the speculate stage, it's just a planning exercise. Yes, Agile does have some planning. I didn't say it didn't have any planning. In the speculate stage, you're going to devise and revise what we call the features list. You'll also talk about what are some of the potential risks. So in my steering wheel example, it could be that there aren't any suppliers that are doing that are giving high grade leather that's available in the United States. So there could be shipping concerns. It could be that if we can't depend on one supplier because they're completely out. So we have to list all of these things, has risks, and we need to be able to manage them with each sprint. Now, the explore stage is where a feature is, of course, when I say features, we're talking about a piece of functionality or outcome that's valuable to our customer. So one or more features are really completed at that sprint, the sprint in 2 to 4 weeks. At the end of the speculate stage, you should have a set of requirements for the next sprint, and you should also have a list of features that you're going to work on for the next sprint. You'll also create effort estimates. Effort estimates means how many labor hours are we going to need to create this leather steering wheel? How many people do we need? What type of skills do we need? Because we're going to be billing the client for all these hours, just like consultants do. So we better tell the client how much money they're going to have to come up out of pocket. Because sometimes when you bring in money into the factor, the client would be like, "Oh, that's okay. I don't think I want a $4,000, leather thing. Let's just go back to the lesser part." That also can happen. So during that explore stage, you're actually trying to develop the actual project. And so the activities during that whole explore stage can also include your daily stand-ups, reviews that come from daily or nearly daily interactions from the business and the technical people. Then we move on to the adapt stage. Now, the adapt stage is where you've got features, and for this iteration, they've already been developed, but now it's time to pause and look and reflect. So in that case, it could be similar to product testing, having actual consumers to trying out the project. So when you go to, for example, like a Costco and the steam cleaners came out, they were having that customers fill out surveys. What are the reasons you wouldn't get a steam cleaner? What would you desire in a steam cleaner? They even noted, some people said the steam cleaner was too heavy to push, or that it was leaking hot water and creating burns when they were trying it in Costco. So then they take back all of that information and to the team and say, okay, looks like we've got some defects that need to be worked on, and we need to tighten up that feature with how the water is loaded into that steam cleaner. Or we might have to tighten up, look at how we can make the steam cleaner lighter weight, because it seems that we have a lot of elderly customers who are more interested in buying a steam cleaner for health reasons. And so, in that adapt stage, it's that whole final review of the features. So after we've got it as close as we think we possibly can, we bring it to the customer. The customer then looks at those features, just like, the steam cleaner situation. They give us feedback. And then we captured all of that information, has lessons learned, and then we share it to work on in the next sprint. So we take that steam cleaner back, we work on the water loading on the steam cleaner. And so the adapt stage can happen very quickly, and it can even be completed as short as like a day. It doesn't have to take forever. Then, lastly, the closeout phase. Obviously, every project has to close and end at some point. So once all the iterations are done, all the features are implemented, then during that stage, you ensure that you have a final lessons learned and you've captured that for the project, and you know what's supposed to happen during each agile stage, and that's what happens now. I think we need to take a deep dive into what those 12 principles of agility are. So that will give you a little bit idea about the culture, day-to-day work life of an agile project team. So here we go. So in agile project development, for these principles, I'm going to use software development as an example so that it'll make a little bit more sense. The first principle says our high priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of software. So what does that mean? It means that the best ways to ensure that your customers are happy while continuously delivering a valuable software are to make iterations frequently and to listen to your market continuously. And so, unlike the traditional approach where to product development, we actually have that were notoriously long cycles. So, if we're talking about a software or a car, you wouldn't know what your car looks like until maybe 6 months down the lane, and then you might get in that car and go, "Oh, this is not what I wanted. None of this is right," and you'd be angry as a consumer because now you've been disappointed. Whereas when we talk about agile, we're going to be meeting with that customer regularly, giving them swatches of leather, testing out the type of speakers they want in their car. So then as we go on, the customer is kept informed all along, even up till we get the final car put together. And even then, they're not dedicated to buy that, but they at least the chances of success are greater because they were part of that whole process, as opposed to here's a car, this is what we think matches, either take it or leave it. That's what the traditional approach was. So doing this successfully means that we're getting a minimal viable product out. And that product could be the car, and could be just the steering wheel. It could be just a viable speakers that you're going to put into the doors of that car, and getting that feedback from real customers. And then that feedback is used to make the product development. Now, the second principle of Agile says, welcome changing requirements, even late in the development. Agile processes harness change for customers' competitive advantage. So, what does that mean? It means that change is constant. We know we have to expect change. Agile principles value support responding to these changes rather than kind of knowing about the change and just choosing to ignore them and moving on forward. So, the previous approach to product development was often change adverse because there was so much time spent into these well-developed documents even before you started the development process that it made people to feel they needed to strongly hold on to this planning document and go rigidly by it, even though they might have understood from the market trends that, hey, you know what, that's not wanted by customers anymore. But just that obligation because you spent so much time, and then you end up with a product that probably doesn't even match the majority of customers' needs. Whereas Agile Principle says, hey, even if you've planned out everything, you're midstream in creating a product, you need to keep an eye and a tempo on the changing markets, the changing customer needs. Also, keep an eye on the competitive threats and change your product features if you have to, and to stay competitive. So, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? It means that product teams are guided by high-level strategic goals and perhaps even themes that are below that goals. And the products department success, how do we measure that? It's going to be against the progress towards those strategic goals rather than delivery of a predefined set of features. Now, the product constantly has as its ear to the ground, monitoring market, customer feedback, any other factors that could influence or even change the direction of how the final product is going to look. So when there's actionable insight is uncovered, then we adjust the plans so that we can better serve that business or the customer's needs. Of course, there's a product strategy, there's also a tactical plan, and both of them are going to be continuously adjusted and shared on a regular cadence so that we can reflect those changes. And so product needs to manage the expectations of these executive stakeholders as well as explain to them why you may have made some changes that depart from the original planning document. Now, the third agile principle says deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for a shorter timescale. So agile philosophy favors breaking down that whole product development into smaller components and using that agile approach, building more frequent mini releases that kind of helps and actually ends up speeding up the overall product development. So it should so usually projects are in big batches of work by definition. However, there's really no obligation for you to deliver the entire product in its entirety all at once. In fact, most customers would probably want to have an early preview of the results to ensure that the project's not deviating too far from the requirements that they had stated. So how does that look in cycle? It means that agile development cycles are going to work in sprints or iterations in a time frame about 2 to 4 weeks. And so if you consider it like a sprint is like a marathon development cycle. And so another popular alternative to agile sprints is continuous deployment. If you're using continuous deployment, you're shipping software frequently, and it works less in terms of predetermined time boxes, but there's a greater focus on deciding what to do and actually doing it. Now, the fourth principle says that business people and developers have to work together daily throughout the project. So what does that mean? It's essentially under emphasizing that communication is a critical component for this team's success. And it mandates that communication needs to be a daily event. It's an old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, that applies to products as well. So a successful product requires insight from both sides, the business side and the technical side. The business side is going to keep us aware of market trends, consumer trends, what's happening with the budget. All of those expertise need to keep us updated. The technical side is going to tell you about what's happening in the process development. Are there the reasons why we might not be able to deliver? So that regular communication between business people and the software development side is going to improve that alignment across that organization, as well as build trust and transparency. So cross-functional agile teams are going to be a part of that whole product development. So the communication would be through daily update meetings or stand-ups is one technique to do that. And we'll talk about the different meetings later on in this presentation. Now, the fifth agile principle is build projects around motivated individuals. Give them that environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. So what does that mean? That means that the agile philosophy is all about empowering individuals, staying away from micromanaging your workers. If you're not micromanaging them, that helps them to feel like they have some ownership of what they're creating, and it builds that trust. So, and the way that you be able to build trust starts with getting the right people and the skill sets to get that job done, and being very clear about what their responsibilities are before the project. Now, once the work is done, you don't need to worry about micromanagement. There's not going to be time spent. And so what it means also is that the product is not responsible for explaining how something should be built. They need to share what and why, but it's really the delivery team's job to determine the how. So during sprints, the product does not, sprint products does not micromanage the outcome. Instead, they make themselves available. Product owners are going to make themselves available to answer any questions, promote any support. So they call it product owner, but they're not really like a boss standing over you. They're not going to be breathing down your neck as you're doing your work. You probably, as a software developer, are going to be working out of your own home in your own personal space. And then at the end, you just say, hey, this is what I was able to do in 2 weeks. Now, the sixth principle says that the most efficient and effective method for conveying information to and within the development team is face to face. Now, we know that a lot of so many development teams actually work remotely these days. But at the root of it all, what we're trying to achieve is this effective communication with the developers. It could be through conversations through as opposed to using like an email or maybe a Slack, which is a messaging system common in the project management world. So the overall objective is really to get product people and developers to communicate in real time. Now, software developers by nature, they tend to be introverts. They don't like to talk a lot. That's why face-to-face communication is important. And we know that people do communicate the most in a nonverbal way. 99% of our communication is nonverbal. So it's important to watch and the facial features, what's going on, the changes, because they could non-verbally speak something that's opposite of what they're writing in an email and so forth. So what it looks like in practice would be having frequent demos, maybe pair programming, having sprint planning meetings, daily stand-ups, and having a backlog. Now, Agile principle number 7 says that a working software is really the primary measure of progress. So it's saying essentially, it's not that you've completed completed the project that's important. It's the fact that whatever you've created actually works. It has some functionality. It's building. So whether we're building a software that where our time should be spent. And so detailed documentation is not the goal. We're not going to get anywhere by planning huge documents and writing them out. But instead, we should be actually working on creating that software feature. And leave all those administrative tasks to the side. So that mentality actually pushes you to get products to the market quicker rather than bogged down with writing all these detailed documents. And so writing the documents can actually be a bottleneck. And the ultimate measure for success is having a product that customers love. So Agile Principle 8 says that Agile principles, processes promote sustainable development. So sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. So what does that mean? It means keeping up with a rapid, demanding release schedule can be taxing for that team, especially if the expectations are too high. So it's best to be mindful of that and set some clear, realistic expectations. And the idea really is to keep the morale high and to improve that whole work-life balance so that you're not burning out your team members and which then eventually leads to turnover, because we're not going to make progress if people are constantly quitting on the project, right? So it means that development team are going to be transparent and not overpromise on what they can and can't deliver. It also means that the product owner has to mathematically calculate the labor hours that are needed. And if the client is asking for something that is going to take a lot more labor hours that could possibly, then they also have to be transparent and say, I'm sorry, we can't do that in 2 to 4 weeks. So maybe we need to prioritize that at another time. So everyone agrees on what's going to be happening during that sprint, and no additional tasks are going to be added in that 2 to 4 weeks. And the gatekeepers are really the product managers. They try to they try to do all the administrative functions, the communication with the stakeholders, so that way the software team does nothing but work on exactly the work that's in front of them. They're not answering phones. They're not doing other tasks. They're just doing that one task that's been handed to them. And so product people really have to do their part in promoting a sense of a psychological safety across that communication team by making the team members feel comfortable to say, hey, I don't think I can do that in 4 weeks. I work a lot slower, and having that open, free flowing feedback. So that brings us to Agile Principle 9, which says that continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. What does that mean? It just means that The shorter cycles and frequent releases puts an emphasis on keeping things tidy. If you're not bogged down with doing multitasking and you're only focusing on one thing, then it should not be unfair to expect that whatever feature you're producing, it's going to be done very cleanly. It shouldn't have any defects. It should be checked out to the best of your ability. Now, of course, you can find stuff later, but you want to try to do it to the best of your ability so it doesn't cause future problems. Now, product managers often forget this aspect of development because they don't spend their days, wadding through the product codes, but it's still of importance. So the team also needs to be, that needs to understand that the developers and the product owner needs to work together to understand, what technicalities are acceptable. That brings us to number 10. And so number 10 principle is going to says that simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done essential. So what that translates is there's the old adage 80-20 rule, and that concept is that 80% of your intended results should be successfully done with just 20% effort. So it's encouraging by thinking of this way is that doing things that have the most impact. You can do a lot of tasks in 1 hour, but you want to pick the tasks that have the most impact. So in product management context, that means having a laser sharp focus on organizational objectives, making some cutthroat prioritization decisions. Also, discouraging building things for the sake of just building, emphasizing, being laser focused on being strategic and building with a purpose. Then number 11 is principle 11 says the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So if we're talking about software development, you'll see that there's a pyramid-shaped team where management often makes the key decision in a traditional approach. But Agile is different. Agile suggests that we should use self-organizing teams, which means that they have a flat organizational structure. So everyone there, it's all chiefs and no followers is essentially how an Agile team works. Everybody is entrusted to do their area of expertise. You don't have a boss that you're really reporting to. And so that concept really lies in that teams and interactions over following these strict, rigid processes and tools. And that helps people to feel that they have ownership over the work they're doing and bringing it together. So that brings us to the last principle, Agile principle number 12. It says that at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to be more effective and adjust their behavior accordingly. So if you're truly living by the Agile principles, there's really no place for thinking, oh, we can't change because we've always done it this way. Just like we're always learning new things about our customers and our markets, we're also learning from the processes that we're using to learn these things. So Agile is not about following this very strictly defined process for every sprint and release. It's really about having a mentality of continuous improvement. And that continuous improvement also extends into how we manage our teams, how we interact with each other, and the processes. So I mentioned a couple of words that may be new to you that are strictly for Agile project management. So I want to take a deeper dive into that. So, for example, I mentioned what are sprints. Sprints are really short cycles of development that you work towards a release, and they can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks so that you can create a usable piece of software. The goal is to try to keep that sprint in that 2 to 4 length throughout the project so that it's just easier to plan that future work, adjust your goals rather than just getting bogged down on one subsection of that project. Now, I also talked about user stories. User stories are that backbone of planning. So it's a user who's testing out that feature. Like I said in my Costco example, then you would put that into a statement. You could say it has a regular maintenance crew worker. I find using this steam cleaner to be heavy and painful on my wrists. that would be a user story. It's telling you who the context of who they are, why that they wouldn't have trouble using that functionality. And it's also telling you more accurate the estimated time that involved to actually make it. So, and then I also mentioned that teams were self-organizing. And so that means that you have regular meetings for keeping your team on track. And so, and I mentioned I would tell you about the different types of meeting. There are three types. There's daily stand-ups. So those are just quick daily meetings where everyone talks through what they're working on. So we'll all talk remotely. We'll get on the, and then we'll say, hey, I'm working on the avatar section of the Roblox. The other person will say, oh, I'm working on creating the scenery for Roblox. And the third person. So it's just a way of confirming that everybody is on board with knowing what their workload is and that they're focused on it. Because you could have somebody say, oh, well, you're working on the avatar. I thought I was working on the avatar. And if you have that conflict, then you should be able to iron it out and catch that early on so that there's not doubling of the same work. Now, the second type of meeting would be sprint planning. These are the longer meetings. They start at the sprint. That's kind of deciding what work needs to be included in that 2 to 4 weeks. What's the end goal for there? How many hours of work do you think we're going to need? The third would be the sprint retrospective. So this is where the teams created this wonderful feature, and it could be the volume button on that steering wheel. And we come together and discuss it. Some might say, well, you know what, that button is a bit sticky, doesn't roll as much. Another person might say, that button's too small, I have large fingers. Another person might also say, you know, that button's kind of rough and it, you know, doesn't work well against my skin. So we'll think about all of these little minutiae and think and from the customer perspective, and then try to improve it. There's also the Agile board. Now the board could be, the board is more like a dashboard. It could be something as cheap as a low-tech whiteboard. You could also, it could be sticky notes. Just really depends on how perfect you are. But there are also lots of technical Agile boards out there, like Trello. Trello is a board. It kind of keeps track of all the communication. It also tells you when was the last time you spoke with the sponsor. And it also lets everybody have a full visual about what the team is working on, especially if there are interdependencies on your task. Like in the Roblox example, I might not be able to create the scenery until I see what colors the avatar are, because the scenery can't be black and my avatar is also black, because then it's not visible. So the Agile board view helps you to, organize your product backlog and the tasks. It includes everything that you need to move, things like the details, what priority is the task, who's assigned to it, even any other files that need to be uploaded. We could have a sharing document where we're talking about the notes of who all we've interviewed, for example, the product owners interviewed to get feedback. So and you could have you could also organize your task board by task view. And so, telling you which tasks are completed. So there are many ways to organize it. Really depends on what your team is going to agree to. Then we have the most important part of a sprint is the product backlog. This is where the users or the test market end up giving feedback, and we track all those feedbacks. And we have the software development team taking ownership of one part to fix it. So we might come back with that steam vacuum cleaner and somebody says, hey, it burnt my foot. Another person might say, hey, I keep pushing the button to turn it on and it doesn't turn red. So then the software developer person would come in and they would work on that, the red button itself, and keep working on it. So it's continuous, and they increase the sensitivity of touch for that. That would be an example of that. And then they would bring it back and test it out with other people till they get the feature to be exactly what the consumer wants. So the backlog is essentially just a list of features, bugs or defect fixes, what got fixed, what didn't, any non-functional requirements, pretty much anything that needs to be done to deliver a working software. And that's also being completed over and over. Now let's talk about, how exactly the team is set up. There are some key team roles that include the Scrum Master, the product owner, and of course, the stakeholders and team members. So the Scrum Master, their job is to ensure that the sprint stays on track They keep monitoring the progress by having a dashboard. They facilitate the movements. They help remove any roadblocks. So they're more so doing the administrative tasks. So it could be like they're in charge of creating the manual for your steam cleaner. And so that would be more writing and creating things. That's not something you want to delegate to your software development team. And so they advocate and help, they communicate with the stakeholders. So the Scrum Master would be speaking with all the investors of the steam vacuum cleaner and telling them, hey, I think we need more money because the type of alert button we have is just not working. We need more time, and so we need you to pay for more labor hours. And then if you're the project owner, you're going to help define the goals of that sprint. You're going to be working very closely with the software development team and saying, okay, John so and so, did you fix that button? Yes. Or he may say, no, I think I need 2 more weeks to fix that button because it's just not responding. It's something with the sensitivity. Then I might say, Rob, so and so. Rob would say, no, the water heater part, it's giving me trouble. So, we're going to have to maybe redesign that through the factory assembly and figure out a different type of material so it's not melting out the plastic bottle that holds the hot water for the steam. And then we've got team members. So, usually it's a project manager who functions as that project owner, but it also can be someone else too. Team members, we said that agile teams are self-organizing, meaning that the project owner or the scrum master is not going to tell the teams how to do it. They're not going to say, I want you to do it a certain way. They just will tell you what the end game is. They go design it, bring back what they have. And so we also have stakeholders. And so stakeholders are anybody who can give you feedback, who's affected by the project. It could be stakeholders could be even maintenance companies or even chemical companies, but they also are just more purely informational. So let's talk about. So we've said that Agile is a pretty good, well embraced process. But what would cause a Agile project to fail? So things like miscommunication with the team, if you're not having, multiple dynamic pieces where people are working on new features on a week to week basis, that can really lead to miscommunication. Each person needs to be transparent and say things like, hey, this piece of software I'm working on, it's just not happening. I need someone to step in and help me. Having that type of trust to say, as much as my expertise goes, I need someone else to do this. That's where the miscommunication. But if you bottle it in and say, I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm completely miserably failing at this, then that's going to create mistrust. That's what so there has to be a commitment to realistic deadlines and working to achieve, and also just being quite transparent about what you can and can't do if you're having any hiccups in your efforts. Second is also poor leadership is probably the number one there. Of course, my slide shows many ones, but I'm going to highlight a few things in the interest of time. And so it's crucial for a Scrum Master to be able to provide spontaneous coaching to the clients and the stakeholders. And they really they're kind of managing any politics that could happen. So you could be working for a client. They could be like, oh my gosh, these software developers, they never get it right. It's like every week we're hearing about this. Well, the shield is going to be your Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is going to step in and say, hey, we are working on it. This is the reason why. So they take care of all of the politics. So that way, the software developers are shielded from any of that. It takes away those distractions, and they're completely focused on that one task that's been given to them. Insufficient management support would be another thing. If the product owner and the Scrum Master are just not that not invested in working with the software developers, and that leaves the developers to be isolated, and they may not be the best people to address the concerns of the consumers or the stakeholders. And that also can lead to a drop in their morale, and then the project tends to fail. So as you can see, that's an extensive topic on its own, but I highlighted most of the features there of why projects fail. In fact, there are books written about it if you want to look into it more. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion tonight. If you have any questions, as always, You can email me. I'll be happy to discuss any part of this even further. Thank you for joining me tonight.